The text before us is the famous hymn found in Paul's letter to the Philippians. Almost certainly it wasn't Paul's own work, but was a hymn used in the early church, which Paul decided to include in his letter at this point. Whether he wrote it or not, the hymn is very much in accord with his theological vision, building as it does on Paul's understanding of the two Adams. According to the hymn, the first Adam clung or grasped at something. This takes us back to the garden and the story of the fall, where the human being reaches up to grasp the forbidden fruit, which is symbolic of divinity itself. The lie placed on the lips of the serpent is that the human being can become God by eating the forbidden fruit from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. The human being can decide for himself or herself what is good and evil. I decide, and therefore usurp the place of God in the scheme of things. The creator becomes a creature, and the creature becomes or tries to become the creator. The human being grasps at the Godhead. The word used in the hymn for cling or grasp is the Greek harpazo, from which we get the English word harpoon. It implies not just a grasping, but a violent grasping which leads to death. The human being in the fall grasps at the fullness of life, divinity itself, and finds the exact opposite. In the search for an ultimate freedom, the sinful human being, the first Adam, becomes a slave. But according to the hymn, Jesus Christ did not grasp at divinity. There was no violence in his humble submission. Instead, what it meant was that he, though sinless, freely agreed to go to the very depths of human sinfulness. The first part of the hymn traces a downward spiral as Jesus takes on the sinful human condition, emptying himself to become a slave. Jesus goes from one depth of powerlessness to another, until finally he appears as the most powerless thing of all, the corpse of an executed criminal. He reaches the bedrock of the human degradation and destitution caused by sin when he humbly accepts even death, death on a cross, which was the most agonizing and shameful death known to the ancient world. Yet at that lowest point, the hymn begins its great turn. In the dark depths which Jesus has entered, God moves. This is what Jesus has to believe as he freely went to his death, that in descending to the depths, he would be met by a God who would raise him up to the heights. And this is how the hymn has it. God reaches into the depths to raise Jesus from the dead and restore him from slavery to the glory of the Son. Through his self-emptying, Jesus is filled with the utter fullness of God. Through his humility, he is glorified. In the story of the fall, human glory and divine glory are set in opposition. The lie of the fallen world is that the human being has to deny or usurp divine glory in order to claim or assert human glory. It's one against the other, a fight to the death. It can't be both. Divine freedom and human freedom clash, and it's this clash which generates the entire biblical story of sin and redemption. For the Bible, redemption comes only once the antagonism between divine and human freedom, divine and human glory is overcome. As long as the antagonism remains, the world is unredeemed. There is only the degradation, the destitution. But according to the hymn, the antagonism is overcome in Jesus Christ crucified and risen. Every tongue proclaims the glory of Jesus, which is in no way opposed to the glory of God the Father. On the contrary, as the hymn has it, every tongue acclaims Jesus Christ as Lord to the glory of God the Father. The glory of Jesus is in complete harmony with the glory of the Father. In him, human freedom is in complete harmony with divine freedom. Paul's own experience of the apostolic ministry was a story of going from one depth of powerlessness to another. He was imprisoned a number of times, and finally he ends up a headless corpse after his execution. Yet in this ever-deepening powerlessness, Paul experienced an empowerment made possible only by the power of the risen Christ. In that sense, the hymn was for him autobiographical. But the hymn also tells the story of every Christian who is called to enter into the mystery of the cross, called to a self-emptying, which opens us to the fullness of God, which is Easter.